Hi guys, welcome back to Matt Chat. This is episode number 27, covering one of my favorite action role-playing games, Autoduel. Autoduel may not be as famous as some of Origin's other games, the company who published it. Of course, Origin was founded by Richard Garriott, aka Lord British, developer of the Ultima series, which is probably one of the most definitive computer role-playing games ever designed. But he had a friend named Chuck Bueche, also known as Chuckles. And Chuckles was also interested in role-playing games, but his focus was more on action and arcade elements. He wanted to find ways to make computer role-playing games more like arcade games. And he definitely found an inspiration with the Steve Jackson games, a tabletop system called Car Wars. Now Car Wars is reminiscent of movies like Mad Max or Death Race 2000, if you remember that. This idea that civilization has collapsed and this sort of anarchy prevails on the highways, and warriors, the equivalent of the warriors in this sort of world, thrive by building up their cars, mounting them with weapons, and then going out and wreaking havoc across the countryside. And Autoduel has a lot in common with that, of course. Instead of building up a party of characters, equipping them with swords and the like, you are buying a car, getting better cars as you go along, and equipping your car with better equipment, motors, engines, parts, and so on. It's a lot of fun. It's a very interesting game. I think you'll enjoy it. Before we get into it, though, I might mention I had the pleasure of interviewing Chuck a few years ago, and he told me a lot of interesting things about this game and his relationship with Steve Jackson games. They were very reluctant about Autoduel. They didn't like the idea of the arcade elements. They didn't like the sort of racing sequences that the game is, of course, so well known for today, which I think is very interesting. Fortunately for Chuck, the game did so well that Steve Jackson games quieted their dissent, although they apparently have shifted back to their earlier review, but that's a different story. But anyway, we've got a lot to cover. There's a lot to this game, so let's get to it. When you first start the game, the first decision, of course, is to name your character, and then you get to distribute some stats. There are only 3 stats for your character here: driving skill, which is pretty self-explanatory, marksmanship, which is going to affect how much damage you're able to do with your weapons, and mechanic ability, which will allow you to scavenge parts from other cars that you manage to destroy. Once you have created your character, you get this city map screen. And there's not a lot you can do right away because you don't have a car yet. But you can buy some body armor, which the manual recommends. It is important if you do get knocked out of your car. You want to have some armor. But you'll probably want to head either to the arena to fight in the amateur night, or take a bus to another city and go to a casino and try to win some money for a car. But I prefer, of course, the amateur night. Now, you may have realized that I'm playing the original Apple II version here. There were, of course, many ports of this game that have better graphics and sound and so on, but this was the first one. And you should see here in a moment just how fast this game can kill you. There's so many ways to die. The amateur night, this is fairly difficult to win. It's not so hard to knock out the other cars. It's actually the difficulty here is conserving your ammo. As soon as you're out of ammo, you're pretty much dead. You can try to escape, but in all likelihood, you're either going to die or have to start over. Of course, most games nowadays would never imagine having such a difficult sequence right at the beginning of the game, and it shows how times have changed. Back in 1985, players were a lot more patient, had a lot more tolerance for this kind of thing. They didn't mind a steep learning curve quite as much. But that said, this is not the controls aren't difficult to learn. I just have controls for moving my car, and then a control for firing, and then I can choose weapons and so on. But the strategy will pick up as soon as I've managed to win this section and can start building my own car. So after several attempts, I was finally able to complete Amateur Night. I think you have to knock out maybe 5 or 6 other cars. Again, the biggest obstacle was the ammo. Then I get to select or assemble my own car, and there are all sorts of choices I have to make that are very interesting, and they have a direct effect on the gameplay. What type of car? Do I want a compact car? Do I want a truck, a van? What kind of suspension do I want on it? How heavy of a frame? I can put more armor on it, and that will let me take more damage, but it'll also weigh me down, so I will be a lot slower. I can mount several different kinds of weapons in the front or the rear or the sides of the car. It's really fascinating, all of these choices. Of course, I can't afford a very good car right away. I'll have to do lots of other things. But this already, you should be able to see the complexity of this game and just how sophisticated it really is. So once you have your own car, then you can start entering the professional divisions. Division 5 is, of course, the easiest. These are the cheapest cars, and it gets harder from there, but also the prizes will be lower. But one thing that's really neat, after you have your own car, then you can, after you defeat another car, climb out and try to salvage some parts or ammo. And since ammo is so scarce, that is a really nice feature. Plus, the parts that you can salvage are actually worth quite a bit, so it's obviously worth your time. And even if you have to leave the arena, you can still sell those parts, so it's very nice. I should probably mention here, too, that you do have a prestige score that is affected by things like leaving an arena without being victorious and so on. And that will play later into the game. It will determine what kind of missions you're eligible for. Once you've managed to upgrade your car with some better weapons and better armor and so on, then you can try to run a courier mission to one of the many cities in this game. It's actually a very large world map, and the highways between the cities are just crawling with really dangerous raiders. You're lucky at the beginning of the game just to get a few miles out of town. Very difficult indeed. Fortunately, the game came with a really nice map that tells you where the cities were, and this is available online. But basically, it's not too hard to get around. The roads are fenced in for your convenience, I suppose. But it won't be long here before I will encounter some raiders. One of the things that this game is noted for is, in addition to being very difficult arcade sequences, and the game also punishes you very severely for dying. If you die in the game, you lose your saved game, unless you have taken the precaution of buying a clone. And those are $3,000 and another very expensive indeed. And even then you lose whatever car you're driving. So it's a very punishing system, definitely doesn't tolerate failure. Of course, it's possible to get around something like that now that we have emulators and can save states and so on. But if you really want the authentic experience, warts and all, you won't use those sorts of features. Now, I had mentioned that there were ports available of this game, but unfortunately, they're not really that spectacular. Here is the version for DOS that came out in '88, 3 years later. And although the graphics are somewhat improved, I don't think they were improved nearly enough. Origin really should have put more money into this, offered up a better production. Technology had certainly come a long way, and they could have done better. You might be wondering, well, if Autoduel was so popular and successful, why weren't there sequels? Why haven't there been lots of remakes? And there have been games that are similar or have similar themes, or may not have been inspired by Autoduel, such as Road War 2000 or Twisted Metal or something like that. But this game here, Car Battler Joe, for the Game Boy Advance, is the closest game I've found to something that I would say follows the Autoduel formula. It is a role-playing game wrapped around these car combat sequences. It's a little odd, definitely not an exact clone, but something worth checking out if you just really want to play something more modern. And that's all for this week's Matt Chat. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider rating it, commenting on it. I'd love to hear from you. You might also want to check out our books, Dungeons and Desktops, a book about computer role-playing games like Autoduel, and Vintage Games, a book that covers a broader array of games from all eras. But just remember, drive offensively. The life you save may be your own.